Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for today's discussion on the Family Love Letter, presented by PBMares Wealth Management and PBMares LLP. My name is Michael McGlary, and I'm an Associate Wealth Advisor here at PBMares Wealth Management. Before we get started, there's a few housekeeping items to cover. Today's webcast is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording and the slides in our follow-up email to you after the broadcast. If you have any questions during today's presentation, you may enter them in the questions box on your screen. We will try to answer as many questions as we can today, but if we don't get to your question, one of our team members will follow up with you after the webcast. Technical difficulties during this live webcast, you can refer to the recording or reach out to our team with any specific questions that you may have. I also have the distinct pleasure to be joined by Risa Flenner. Risa, if you'd like to take a moment to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Risa Flenner, and I am the Director of Succession Planning here at PBMares. I work frequently with high net worth individuals who are also business owners, and we help them with all their succession planning, both with their personal wealth as well as with the transition of their business. And it's a pleasure to be here today.
Thanks, Risa. There's also myself. As I mentioned, my name is Michael McGlary. I'm an Associate Wealth Advisor on our Wealth Management team, where I assist our clients with items like comprehensive financial planning, investment analysis, insurance and estate planning, and I also head up our Family Love Letter program, the topic of today's discussion. So as we dive into today's presentation, let's take a look at our agenda. So we're going to start really high level and discuss some estate planning basics and the importance of having an estate plan. And then we're going to look at the impact this planning has specifically on family businesses and their transition. And then lastly, to tie everything together, how the Family Love Letter can help you to leave a legacy. The Family Love Letter is a critical planning tool that's designed to help you get your house in order beyond just your will and other legal documents. So let's briefly touch on the topic that everybody knows they need, but nobody wants to talk about: estate planning. Estate planning is like maintaining the guest room in your own house. You may have furnished your guest room with a nice queen bed and curtains and a small desk. And sure, right now, nobody's using it. But when a thunderstorm comes and the guest room has to be occupied by your children or grandchildren or siblings, during that stressful time, will they find a guest room that's a comfortable living space with fresh linen and clean towels? Or is the guest room kept at a warm and toasty 80 degrees, and maybe it hasn't been cleaned in a good while? For over 3 decades, our team has helped educate our clients on their estate planning goals and needs. Fundamentally, estate planning is about more than just the death and the taxes. It's also about the legacy that you leave behind when you can no longer be there to help your family. Will you leave chaos, or will you leave a well-conceived plan with information to help your family in a time of grief and confusion? Let's just look at perhaps the most simple estate planning document, a will. Caring.com conducted a survey with over 2,500 Americans and found that over 2/3 of adults still don't have a simple will that would help them avoid the probate process. Interestingly enough, it does seem that COVID's had an effect on younger generations. The number of young adults with a will has risen by 50% since before the pandemic, and those who've had a serious case of COVID-19 are 66% more likely to have a will. But regardless, over 2/3 of adults not having a simple will is clearly an issue. Remember that if you haven't yet done the all-important work of dictating and signing instructions for the disposition of your assets, then your state probate court system's more than happy to step in and help, as long as they can settle your estate in a very time-consuming, very expensive, and very public manner. It's like if the thunderstorm rolled in and your children need to access your guest room, but the state court has the door locked and they won't open it until they can get inside, take an inventory of the guest room, and then publish their findings on the internet just to get paid for all their hard work. So why is this important? Well, several years ago, a legacy planning organization called the Williams Group published the results of their 25-year study that revealed out of over 3,200 instances of generational wealth transfer, 70% of those wealth transitions failed. where they defined failure as the involuntary loss of control of the assets. Williams then took the analysis a step further, exploring the reasons behind those failures, and they attributed only 3% of the failed transitions to poor technical advice. There are plenty of moving parts in tax and estate law, and ambiguities abound as to their interpretation and implementation. And so the legal, insurance, accounting, and investing professions, we all spend a great deal of time and money on accreditation and continuing education to keep up to date and stay current on best practices. Although change is certain to remain a constant when it comes to the correct trust structures and transition plans, the how of wealth transfer is a relatively settled science. What was most interesting was that 97% of the failures were attributed to the family itself, whether it was due to a lack of family mission, inadequate preparation of heirs, or a breakdown of family communication and trust. The common thread in each of these causes of failure is some form of lack of communication. Therefore, better communication is the common cure. The typical family may spend more time planning the next vacation or researching the purchase of a new dishwasher than they do discussing the legacy they want to leave to the future generations and how best they can realize those wishes. So how do we solve this issue? The family love letter. We all need to speak more about the why of wealth, not just the how of transferring it to our children. And this is what the love letter can help you accomplish. After we launched our Family Love Letter program, naturally a great deal of our clients wished to conduct their own Family Love Letter meetings. And something that we noticed that continued to pop up in these discussions involved our clients who ran family businesses. And so I began researching the relationship between personal wealth and small family business ownership from a generational perspective. And what I found was that the same shortfalls that persist on the personal side were far exacerbated on the business side. Lack of communication consistently leads to poor transitions. Many of us are unaware that 35% of all Fortune 500 companies happen to be family owned. For example, Walmart has been in the family for generations, and we can even see this present in our own regional footprint. Marriott is headquartered in Bethesda, Maryland, has been in the Marriott family for generations. And while these examples are obviously outliers and not indicative of the typical family business, it does provide us with some context as to the importance of these companies, especially after learning that family businesses are responsible for the employment of over half of all Americans. To see how they get the title of the backbone of our economy. And this is where planning comes into play. 2.3 million small businesses happen to employ over 25 million people, and they're owned by the baby boomer generation. Many economists have been preaching for several years of the looming great wealth transfer, where $30 trillion will change hands to younger generations over the next several years. Family-owned businesses are not insulated from this transfer, and yet 50% of small business owners have not even began to contemplate a succession plan. As you can imagine, the economic impact of the boomer generation aging and running into health problems and burning out cannot be overstated. The consequences of a failed succession plan will directly impact these 25 million families who are employed by small business owners. And the indirect impact is even more staggering, with tens of millions of additional vendors, suppliers, partners, contractors, and others. They all rely on these boomer-owned companies to stay in business and are interdependent on one another's existence and welfare. Succession planning for these family businesses can ultimately mean the difference between continuing growth and prosperity or closing up shop. There's countless obstacles when it comes to family business transition. And generally speaking, the biggest hindrances come from within. A study from the University of Connecticut's Family Business Program found that in nearly half of all failure of business collapses, the failure of the business was precipitated by the founder. And typically, it's not just one issue that can hinder a succession plan, but any combination of some of the challenges listed here. Maybe the current generation, the owners, have no plans for what's next after they leave the day-to-day operations, and they just desire to keep working. Maybe they haven't yet discussed the business with their children or grandchildren, and therefore haven't given them opportunities to learn, and they feel that they're not ready for an active role in the company. Is the next generation old enough or adequately prepared to enter into a leadership role? Have they been educated and socialized within the business to learn all the ins and outs? And is there a clear and direct next in line to assume this role? Has the family overall had any discussions on a shared purpose and vision for how they want to work together? Maybe a brother and sister have some unresolved conflicts that could pose issues, or the current owner has hidden the next in line out of fear it could cause a rift in the family. And lastly, the owner may not have even prepared the employee base of the transition. And the staff's not prepared to operate the business without the owner and are unable to voice their concerns. We all understand that each generation has very different views on wealth, spending, work, and business, and these all must be taken into consideration when planning. It makes me think of Steve. Steve's a second-generation owner of a business started by his father many years ago. He's an older millennial, and he takes after his dad a great deal when it comes to work and business, more traditional in that sense. Steve has a son, Ben. Just like Steve's father before him, he wishes for his son to take over the family business one day. He has this idea that once Ben's older and out of college, Steve's going to pass along all his knowledge and ownership of the company to keep it in the family. Unfortunately, Steve and Ben have never actually sat down and had an in-depth conversation about the family business. Unbeknownst to Steve, Ben wants to move out west after he graduates, focus on software development, and maybe start his own company. You can imagine how difficult this conversation, when it finally occurs, ultimately will be, and the strain it may take on the family and their relationships the longer it's delayed. If you were in Steve's shoes, what would you do? Should he strong arm his son to work in the family business, or keep working at the business himself, die at his desk, and leave the business to his wife to figure out what to do with? Or should he try to sell the business to an outside buyer and then retire from his life's work, but no longer have control over the vision and culture of the future of the business? Obviously, there's no easy answer, but succession and business transition is a problem that needs to be addressed. Before I hand the reins over to Risa to talk a little more in detail about her experience with family business owners, we have a short polling question. On a scale from 1 to 5, how comfortable are you with your current succession plan? So we'll give it just a moment. Okay, so as we can see, about a third of everybody falls in the number 2 spot. Concerned, started a plan, but haven't made some progress. I think probably most people would fall somewhere in that range. Okay, Risa, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I'm going to build on what Michael has been talking about, and I'll just share some, having done this for as many years as I have, which is 20 something, and I'm a young boomer, so I try not to take offense when people talk about boomers, but I'm going to talk about them a little bit myself here. Okay, next slide. So family business, the family business mindset, and what's beautiful about the family business is that frequently the family make more money or sometimes are more profitable than your large public companies because they aren't so worried about hitting an earnings target. They're much more concerned about having the business be around for generations and having having other family members take over and run the company. So this sort of frees the owners up to be in a better position to withstand the ups and downs of the market, because they don't have shareholders to answer to, so they have a little more freedom and they are a little bit more nimble to adapt to the changing landscape of the economy. Okay, next. And that's what gives them the competitive advantage, because they're thinking about resiliency long term and much less focused on rapid growth. Now, there is a price that's paid for this resiliency, and that is the emotional attachment that founding members form with the company they found, and not just the founding members, but frequently, that the spouse and that same generation. It's a lot of work to get a family business off the ground. It takes commitment. It's a 24/7 job in the beginning, and so naturally there is a greater attachment to that business than say somebody would have to the stock they own in GE. Okay, next. So frequently when we're doing estate planning for individuals, we'll find that when we're talking about what we're going to do with their brokerage account or their home or maybe their art collection, they can be decisive and practical and weigh the pros and the cons and make practical decisions, or they'll even just defer to the spouse, the one who's maybe not as involved in the family business. And that's an easier decision for founders of family businesses to make, where they want their brokerage account to go, where they want that Van Gogh to go, and things like that. Okay, next. But when it comes to actually making the plan for the business succession, that's where things get really tricky. And that's where founders frequently really hem and haw and don't want to make a decision, just like Michael was talking about earlier. There's a breakdown in communications. They're stuck. Sometimes they just get stuck and they can't make a decision. They can't move forward because they have their identity is so intertwined with the business itself that it triggers some emotional resistance to identifying, or even identifying with no longer being the owner of the business. Okay. So very often when we're sitting down and we're doing estate planning, the easy part is what we are going to do with all these other assets that you may have accumulated during your life. And the hard part always is, or not always, but generally is, what are we going to do with this business? How are we going to transfer this business to the next generation? And that takes a lot more energy, a lot more time, and it takes a lot more communication, which is frequently what the problem is, as Michael was saying earlier. Families have to be able to communicate with one another. Spouses have to be able to communicate with one another to make this very important decision. And that sometimes is a barrier to folks being able to make it and have it in place and being able to move on. And contrary to what you may have heard, and I think there is there's a couple of varying opinions here, but generally speaking, most family businesses don't fail within 3 generations as we think of 3 generations. My understanding is that statistic came from a limited study of a manufacturing company in Illinois in the 80s. And so it's a 40-year-old study. So I don't believe that 1/3 of businesses fail within 3 generations. We can go next. But even if you did find that study was accurate, the way they define 3 generations is 30 years as a generation. So 3 generations is 90 years. So if you only make it to 2 generations, that's still 60 years, which is a very long time for a family business to be around. So I wouldn't say I wouldn't necessarily say you're unsuccessful if your business has only been around for 60 years. And here's the issue, is that the job of the first generation business founder is to have this entrepreneurial spirit whose work and drive is to just succeed and to have this enduring business endeavor. And frequently this generation thinks the next generation should think that I did this way, and this is the way you need to do it if you're going to be successful. I've driven this business, and now we are successful. And this is what your value system needs to be, and your skill set needs to be in order for it to continue to be successful. And I think that standard is too high. That's asking too much of the second generation. Next. The second generation can't just be stuck with the idea of all I have to do is sustain the founder's vision. And when, my dad dies, I know all he's thinking about is he wants me to keep this business running the same way he's been running it for the last 30 years. And I think that is asking too little of the second generation. You can't expect them to just harness their own creativity and not be thinking outside the box, because that's not how your dad did it. Okay, next. So the goal here is to keep the founder's dream alive without smothering the future generation's spirit and ability to create value. Just because it's not the same, just because the second generation may not be running the business exactly the same, they're capable of adding value in their own right. Okay. And the way we do that, the way you set that second and third and fourth generation up for success, there's two areas we want to focus on. And one is the company culture, and then the other is good governance. And we will talk about good governance in a minute, but right now we'll talk about the company culture. And this is after, maybe you do this before you even think about how you're going to, how your business is going to go, how you want it to go out when you pass away. Because if you make a conscious decision to have the company culture that includes some of these bullet points I'm going to talk about, then that might actually help you make the decision on which one of your children, if any, would be capable of running the business. They're the ones that you would entrust with running it going forward. And in this company culture we have generational success, is the first generation gives the second generation permission to search for new opportunities inside and outside the family business model. In other words, if you raise a kid and your expectation is they're always going to work for the company, and you never give them the opportunity to voice their opinion that they don't want to work for the company, which is similar to the example that Michael gave earlier, then I'm not sure that you're going to be successful with that. Whereas if you give them the opportunity to go out and do other things, learn other ways of doing things, sometimes they come back to the company and they have more value. So pigeonholing family members to run the company when maybe that isn't their forte is probably not the best idea. You want to encourage folks to make calculated risk. Just like as a founder, you make calculated risk, but you trust your own calculation, and maybe you don't trust the kids' calculation so much. But you still do need to encourage them to take calculated risk. And you want to include the viewpoints of various family members in the decision-making process. So while you're making decisions for maybe a new line or a new division or expansion, you want to bring in the family members that you were thinking would be able to run the company after you pass, and hear them out. Listen to how their minds work. Listen to how their decision processing goes in their heads, and develop some opinions on how successful you think they would be able to run the company, using that as a guidepost. Okay. And you want to set the stage for a successful transition to what might likely be a different leadership style. The folks we all have these generational preconceived notions, but the folks in the generation after the boomers are generally not as black and white. They have had a whole different experience. They know more technology. They've been exposed to lots of things that some of us who were born previous to that generation have not been exposed to. So you wouldn't expect that their leadership style would be exactly the same as your leadership style. And sometimes that's a hard pill to swallow, but you have to get comfortable with that. You have to get comfortable with entrusting somebody else to run your business. And just like when you do your will and you want to make sure you leave a guardian in there in case both you and your spouse die while your children are still minors, that's a hard decision. Who it is will take care of your kids after you pass, and you have to have an enormous amount of trust in those people. And this is a very similar decision, although not nearly as important, but it's a very similar decision for your business transition. Who do you want to take over when you pass? So these are important things that you need to think about and be intentional about well in advance of when you pass away or retire. I don't mean to sound like the Grim Reaper here. And founders can set future generations up for success by emphasizing The businesses require nurturing and an ongoing commitment. Although, maybe your dad has been home every night at 5 o'clock in your recent memory, but when the business first started, he was there 24/7, or your mom was there 24/7, and they were working very, very hard to make the business successful. So it's important that folks understand that it's an ongoing commitment, and there will be times when it will take your time and your energy and your mindset will all be focused on your business. And then also to let your family know that this business has an emotional value beyond financial wealth, that you are either providing a service to the community or you're providing goods to the community, but there's a value associated with it beyond how much money you make. And it relates to that issue we talked about earlier, where I was saying that the business and the owner's identity frequently get intertwined. This is that same idea. Okay. And you have to make, I find that the people who have been most successful with succession have been folks that have emphasized that the business and the family are equal priorities, that the business isn't superior to the family and isn't more important than the family. And so there will be times when the family has to take a back seat, and then there will be other times when the business can take a back seat. I don't think that the boomer example of the dad or the mom or the dad always being at work and the family always coming second, and people go on vacation without the business owner, that isn't going to work for the next generation. So we have to come to some sort of acceptance of that and figure out a way to make it work. Okay, next. And then the next thing that I have found that has made this succession successful is if you have good governance before you need it. In other words, if you set out the guidelines for the future generation on how the business is to be directed, managed, and controlled, this would be your map, your roadmap to how decisions are made, how the company is managed day to day. Just something to give folks a roadmap to follow once you're no longer there to guide them. Okay. And what good governance does is it regulates the interaction between the administrative and executive management, and it draws a line between family and business. What you want to do if you have a business where their employees are family and then there are other employees who are not family, that is tricky, and it probably works out okay for the founder because it's his company, and but when you get into the second generation and the employees have perhaps been with their company longer than the second generation and certainly know more about how it is run, that causes or has the potential to cause a lot of tension. Okay, next. And the business is most vulnerable during succession. The absence of a clear succession plan and adequate tools enabling the smooth transition from one generation to the next can lead to conflict that threatens the survival of the business, which is why I would recommend that we make the transition before we put the plan in place, and we actually make the transition before there's a death. That way, when it's in its most vulnerable state, there will still be someone around to help the second generation make the necessary decisions to keep the company successful. And a governance manual is frequently done. It's a lot of work, but it's really a good idea. It doesn't have to be too specific, but to leave a roadmap written so that no one is relying on memory and it's clear for everyone to read to the folks you're leaving the company to. Okay. And some attributes of a good governance plan would be no favoritism. So where the business is driven by merit and equal opportunity, but if a non-family member has the same opportunity for advancement as a family member, and that is clearly laid out in your governance agreement, your governance document, so everybody knows what's expected of them, that goes a long way to alleviating tension in the future. And the internal policies are impartial and fair and are the same for family members and non-family members, and also are the same for family members, for all the family members. So everybody is treated the same. And if you have that laid out, we're all clear on it when the business transfers, it does lead to a much greater likelihood that there's not going to be tension in the future. You're not going to tear your family apart because you try to do what was best for the business. You have to bear in mind that, family is different human beings and they have different value systems. So you want to make sure that everybody understands where you are, what's going to happen, and this is how it's going to work, so that you don't have brothers against sisters or mothers against sons or mothers against daughters, and everything is impartial and fair. Okay? So we want to leave clear roles and responsibilities. You want to promote solidarity, and you want to create a sense of ownership. You want the family to know that they now own the business. They're important to the business. And it was a conscious decision on your part to transfer the business the way it was transferred. It wasn't just transferred because you wanted to retire and so you just, walked out one day and let the family take over running the business. So that's very important. So we have a couple of examples here of what good governance looks like. One thing that I've seen is where we have a family assembly, and this is family member owners. It's a family member only body, and what you focus on here is have focused on here is financial literacy and the philanthropic goals of the family. Frequently, you will start this well before the transition, and you're going to want to teach the kids or the next generation about financial literacy, what your books look like, how you do things, how to be responsible with the money, and then also if you have philanthropic goals, what your causes are, where you help, have the family get together and discuss how much you're going to leave or how much you want to give to each one of the causes every year. And that leads to, if you do that well in advance of the succession, that helps folks be prepared to run that aspect of your business and to not be so in the dark about what the philanthropic and financial goals are of the company. And if you do that family members only, that's helpful in that folks who already are aware of financial literacy or are already financially literate or are aware of the company's philanthropic goals, that if they're not in there, they're not in the same meeting, frequently you'll get more open communications and be able to help the family members learn, get on board with these two aspects. So that's the family assembly. And then the family council, this group generally deals with business decisions that roll up then to the non-family members. So this is like a board of directors almost. They make the business decisions that then they turn around and share with non-family members.
Thank you, Risa. Great insight.
Oh, sure.
Some observations that you've seen when working with business owners and their transitions. And as Risa mentioned, a good foundation for any successful succession plan really starts with that high quality communication. And this is where we can really utilize the family love letter, and it really shines. By gathering your involved family members and other key decision makers into a family meeting and having a conversation, you're able to construct a transition plan that keeps everybody on the same page and allows everyone's voices to be heard. And the family love letter also really helps you prepare for the avoidance of a death tax and also a legacy for the living. And it can provide your heirs with executed estate planning documents, as well as basic information about your intentions. and it can reduce and eliminate the dissipation of assets, as well as confusion, stress, and conflict in a time of grief. So to wrap everything up, as your trusted advisors, how can we best help you? We'd be more than happy to set up a time to review your current succession or estate plan. If you have yet to start your succession plan, I know some people had mentioned in the polling that they hadn't started yet, or even as a supplement to your current plan, we'd love to assist you with completing your very own family love letter notebook and conducting a family meeting. And we can help you and your family discuss and identify goals by constructing a family business mission.
I do think that's where we add a lot of, or can add a lot of value, is participating in the family meetings maybe as a facilitator to try to keep, frequently if there's an outsider in a family meeting, emotions won't run as high, and you can get to, you can make more decisions because you don't get bogged down with interpersonal tit for tat. So I have found that frequently we make a lot more progress with families, and if we have a family meeting where there's one outsider involved, and you have an agenda, and everybody's aware of what the agenda is, and you're going to work through all the, or at least attempt to work through all the issues. You're going to raise all the issues, at least, that all the impediments to having a successful plan, so that we can all get on the same page, well in advance of there being any transition.
Sure. I've had a couple of questions come in. One of them, Risa, if you have a transfer upon death document, doesn't that avoid any taxes?
If you have a transfer on death document, that avoids probate. That means that the minute you pass away, the ownership transfers to somebody else. But if you're talking about estate tax is in fact a transfer tax. It's the tax of all the assets that you transfer upon your death. So by virtue of the fact that it transferred immediately when you died because you had a transfer on death deed in place, that does not exclude it from being taxable as a transfer. It just keeps it out of your probate estate. So just because something isn't in your probate estate does not mean that it's not in your taxable estate.
Mm-hmm. Someone else also asked, are we going to receive a copy of the webinar? Yes, everybody will get a copy of the recording as well as the slides. That'll be in an email sent out afterwards. Someone else also mentioned, it's not really a question, it's more of an observation. With the inclusion of viewpoints of others, I think the decision maker should also listen to the ideas of others in the business. As per me, the ideas turn the business moral. Absolutely.
No, I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, that's okay.
No, I think that when we're going to open up communications, which is the whole idea. Let's just talk about this, people. If we're going to open up communications, there'll be times when you want to include other people that are not in the family but understand the business. Certainly, but you can't. Sometimes those conversations are easier. Sometimes the harder conversations are when it's a family only conversation.
Just had another one come in. My business is gathering property, but I do not have an official business. How to pass this along?
So are we talking about real estate? We're in the business of accumulating real estate?
Believe so.
House
rentals.
You would pass that pardon?
House rentals.
Oh yeah, house rentals. Well, I would assume, and this might be a bad assumption, that you have all of these rentals in an LLC, either everyone in its own LLC or a couple in an LLC for liability purposes. But just another asset that you need to provide for what's going to happen to it after you pass away, or if you want to sell it to your kids. If it turns out that it's a little bit of a cash cow, but it doesn't require a lot of time and energy, that's an easy decision. But if it's something that requires a lot of time and a lot of thinking, and you have a lot of know-how, then you may want to bring some family member in sooner rather than later and help get them up to speed on that. But you could certainly transfer that in a will, or you could sell your interest to your kids a little bit over time to provide for your retirement. We didn't touch on that, but you could sell the business to your children to provide for your retirement. But yeah, you will need to devise a plan to pass that along.
Sure. I'm sure there's one question that's on everyone's mind. Hey, family love letter sounds great. I would love to do one for myself and my family, but what's the cost? Well, our program is really a value add to our clients. This is included in your current and ongoing relationship with PBMares. So if you have any questions or you want to look into it further, feel free, send me or your current PBMares advisor an email, and we'd be more than happy to schedule a time to talk, set up a meeting. Here's my email on the screen here, as well as Risa's if you have further questions. And thank everybody for joining us today. We hope that you found this presentation useful and informative. Please don't hesitate to reach out for more information. And if you did send us a question that we didn't get to during the webcast, we'll follow up with you at the conclusion of this. And you'll also receive, once we log out of here, a brief 3-question survey. We ask that you just take a couple minutes to complete it, and your responses will really help us develop future webinars. Thank you, everybody, and have a great afternoon.